Plato's Theory of Forms by Dr. Israelsen. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the goals that Plato has with this theory. The theory of forms is really the centerpiece of Platonic metaphysics. We see forms appearing as a motif or a line of investigation in dialogues such as the Euthyphro, the Meno, the Phaedrus, Republic, of course, and Socrates is often presented as asking his interlocutors for the form. In the Euthyphro, he's asking about the form of piety to this priest, this self-proclaimed expert on piety, Euthyphro. Meno, who's asking Socrates about virtue, or how virtue is acquired at the beginning of the dialogue named after Meno. And Socrates says, well, I don't know what virtue is. Define virtue for me, Meno. What is the form of virtue, right? So this notion of form runs throughout the Platonic dialogues, and understanding forms is sort of tantamount in a sense to understanding Plato. So Plato's goals with the theory of forms. One goal is to address Presocratic concerns. So the sorts of questions the Presocratic philosophers, people like Thales, Xenophanes, Heraclitus, Parmenides, are asking is, what is the nature of reality, right? Questions about the one and the many, which is a concept we'll be talking quite a bit about in this lecture. To explain, right, in brief, sort of anticipating what's coming, to explain is to reduce to unity, to take multiplicity and reduce it to theoretical first principles, and thus to achieve a type of conceptual unity. So how do we get unity of explanation without reducing the many to sameness, as Parmenides does or Thales does with their theories of sort of logical and physical monism, respectively? How do we explain the one and the many? How do we account for change and permanence? How does one thing become another, right? So forms are sort of supposed to provide a lot of answers to these sorts of physical and metaphysical questions posed by Plato's predecessors. He also wants to address Socratic concerns, right? Normative questions. What is virtue, piety, beauty, justice, etc.? The sorts of conversations that Socrates is constantly having with his fellow Athenians. Forms are designed to answer questions like that, to account for moral qualities like virtue, like piety, that there really is such a thing as virtue, really is such a thing as piety. These are metaphysical realities. Another goal is to refute the Sophists. Recall that the Sophists are these paid professional rhetoricians and teachers, people like Protagoras, Gorgias, Callicles, Thrasymachus, who assert that there is no truth. Everything is just will to power, to anticipate and use a phrase from Nietzsche. Everything is just competing and shifting opinion, and knowledge is really just a cloaked word for power. So he's trying to refute the Sophists. Plato very firmly believes that there is such a thing as truth. He's, in that sense, sides with his fellow philosophers, such as Parmenides and Xenophanes. There really is a truth out there, and human beings have the capacity to grasp it, right? But how do we distinguish between truth and mere opinion, right? Forms are designed to answer epistemic questions like that. Finally, to address political concerns, right? How is a just state possible? Plato lives in a time of incredible political tumult. The government is constantly changing hands, not just changing hands, but changing constitution types, changing political types from a tyranny to a democracy to an oligarchy, right? He addresses these sorts of changes, of course, at length in Republic, but those are daily political realities of the ancient world, not just theoretical and abstract concerns. His teacher was put to death, right, for practicing philosophy. So, of course, he's concerned with stopping those sorts of things from happening again. Okay, so moving on to a basic question. What is really real? So there's a Presocratic legacy at play with this fundamental sort of question, right? Think back to Thales. Thales is asking about the fundamental stuff that nature is comprised of. So when Thales says everything is water, he's attempting to give an account of the sort of underlying substratum that accounts for change and differentiation. How is it possible that I can ingest meat and fish? I eat a lot of fish but don't become a fish in the process, right? Rather, the fish stuff is converted into human stuff and becomes part of me, indicating that there's some sort of material substratum unifying me with the fish, that at root we're not different but the same. And of course, modern science is still predicated upon exactly the same sorts of explanatory lines. So Thales, water, Xenophanes, the unknown God. Xenophanes points to this sort of not like Zeus, not like the deities that are worshipped in his time that mortals think up and create after their own image, not these anthropomorphic projections, but a real sort of God. All of him thinks, all sees, all hears, right? That's the Xenophonian answer for what is really real or most real. For Parmenides, it's what is or pure being. But all of these thinkers are attempting to answer the question, what is most fundamentally real? That is, they're attempting to answer the question of ontology or metaphysics or first philosophy. What is what's really real? For Plato, the answer is forms are what is really real. And forms are real ideas, eternal essences, uncreated verities, uncreated realities. Things like justice, truth, goodness, beauty, hotness, coldness, red, blue, standing, sitting. I mean, anything that has conceptual content is a form. It's the eidetic content of the thinkable, of what is thought. And Plato is a sort of idealist and holds that what is really real are the eidetic contents of reality, the ideas. Ideas are not just subjective phenomena in the brains of thinkers. Ideas are the fundamental building blocks of reality. So the one and the many, let's talk about this goal a little bit more. As I mentioned on a previous slide, to explain is to unify. To explain is to offer common concepts that provide a type of conceptual web that link together a variety of particulars. So a complete explanation is thus complete unity. If you think about the goal, the goals of modern physicists, it's to find a unifying theory that will unite classical with quantum mechanics, the theory of everything. The goal of scientific or any sort of real robust explanation is always to provide a type of unification of discrete particulars. So Parmenides holds that what is a whole of a single kind, ungenerated and imperishable, without parts or difference or passage of time. Recall that in the Parmenidean poem, the Choros, the young man, is shown by the goddess the two paths of inquiry, what is and what is not. She then reminds him that what is not a real path and cannot be investigated, for there's nothing there to be known, for it is not. For the same thing as for thinking and for being, right? What is thinkable. Being is therefore thought, and thought is of being. But since there is only the path of what is and not the path of what is not, right? What is like is a whole of a single kind, because what is could not be differentiated from itself without introducing the principle of what is not as a differentiator. But there is no what is not, hence there's no difference. There's no coming to be, there's no passing away, there's only logical unity, right? So what do we say of difference? Well, Parmenides has a long section on the doxa, the common beliefs, the common cosmology, the beliefs about people about how the world is constituted, the world as it's presented to our senses. It's difficult to know exactly how to interpret that part of the poem, given the truth part, the on nature part that comes first, and the interpretations vary. There's a lot of interesting secondary literature on this question. But if we take, for the time being at least, Parmenides to be sincere in his monism, then all of that difference is a mere seeming in some sense. It's not the real truth. It's some sort of an ongoing semi-cogent dream, something like Maya, the illusion of the material world in Hinduism and Buddhism in that tradition. Right. So one of the key problems of metaphysics is clearly that of reconciling unity and difference, or the one and the many. If explanation tends to unify, but the world presents us with a multifarious variety of things, then one of the basic problems of any sort of explanation of reality is accounting for unity and difference. So one question might be, why not simply many? The world presents us with many things, why not stop there? Clearly there are many, why is this one even necessary? It seems that reality contains many things of various and diverse natures. Physical things such as trees, stars, human beings, and animals, as well as mental things such as ideas, thoughts, memories, anticipations, and feelings. Other things we might call abstract things, such as numbers, logical relations, explanatory concepts. Another class of things we might call normative things, like goodness, virtue, justice, and beauty. Finally, we have things we might call properties of physical things, accidents or qualities. Things like large, small, hot, cold, smooth, coarse, red, and green, that are not themselves substances, but the qualities that substances possess. So why not stop there? Why do we need the one? Why not rest content at the many? Well, I mean, as the kaleidoscopic sort of picture here kind of indicates, to stop there would be to, in a certain sense, deny ourselves as rational animals, right? Even an animal, though, not a non-rational animal, in order to functionally move about in the world, has to be able to meaningfully differentiate between certain types of difference, to differentiate food from non-food. And that requires some sort of meaningful ability to judge, meaningful ability to reduce the variety of things to common concepts in order to judge between them. So any degree of practical interaction with the world alone, let alone any sort of theoretical contemplation of it, would seem to require that there be unity behind this difference, right? We're rational beings. So we can't simply stop at the many because we're not merely sensible beings, we're also rational beings. So this leads nicely into this concept that is so central to Greek philosophy and by extension all of Western philosophy, that of logos, or the logos. So Aristotle, very famous line, first line of his book Metaphysics, says, all men by nature desire to know. The wording is very important here. By nature, men desire to know. It's not just an impulse that's implanted in us through education. It's not like by accident some people acquire this weird, habituation or disposition where they want to acquire knowledge. By nature, people desire knowledge. Small children are the best evidence of this. Kids are insatiable, voracious to understand the world. They can't stop asking why. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? How does this work? How does that work? It very quickly becomes difficult to answer the questions of an intelligent child because they keep pushing you for explanations, and they don't stop at partial explanations. They want complete explanations. But as anyone who's ever tried to give a complete explanation of anything knows, it's difficult because the world is complex and some things appear to be brute facts. So if a child asks, why does it snow? Well, you can tell them certain things about the water cycle and weather patterns, but you can't really ultimately answer the question why it is that way. It's just a brute fact that we live in a world constituted with water in it, that it gets heated up and happens to fall sometimes from the sky. It's just how it seems to be, right? So if all people by nature desire to know, then we might wonder, how is knowledge of the many possible? Right? Aristotle declares that there can be no science of individual things because individual things are particulars, just like, think about it in terms of individual people. You couldn't give a scientific account of an individual. You can only give scientific accounts of a general class of things. But you couldn't give a science of Chad, for instance. There's just knowing Chad as a person and his particular dispositions, his likes and dislikes. But the minute you tried to systematize it as a science, you would be moving away from the particularities of who this person Chad is to general concepts such as, he's kind, he's generous, he's, good with kids, whatever they might be. But those are all just general concepts that apply to more things than just this instance Chad. And then you're not dealing with one individual anymore, you're dealing with common concepts, right? So there's no science of the individual per se, only science of things that share common traits with other things of that type. So that's why not, right? That's why there's no science of individual things. So to understand is to see past difference and to grasp underlying sameness. That's just what it is to understand things in the world, is to grasp underlying common traits. Again, think back to Thales with water, to posit some sort of underlying sameness that allows us to understand the world of change, the world of particular things that exhibit and participate in universal patterns, properties and traits, right? This is what it is to understand these sorts of things. So knowing is thus a process of uncovering the hidden unity that explains the apparent diversity of being. And the word uncovering here, the Greek word for truth is aletheia, which literally means uncovering, right? So sort of removing the mantle of nature and witnessing her bare form. That's what knowledge is as conceived of by the Greeks. So balancing the one and the many. The one without the many is tyranny. If we reduce everything to a single explanatory principle, as Thales does with water, well, we lose all grip on what water even means because we no longer can give any explanatory preference when we say the word water to the stuff that is in the ocean or that comes out of the faucets, because that's no more water than the faucet itself or the air around it. So water has just become a synonym at that point for everything, and we've sort of lost our conceptual grip on anything. So the one without the many is a type of conceptual tyranny, but the many without the one is unbridled chaos. So we need to balance these two out. How can reality be both one and many? That's really the question. Every world religion, in a sense, is trying to answer that. How can there be both God and all these individual people? And how one answers that question determines what kind of religion it is. If ultimately there's only one thing, like there is in Hinduism, right? An Atman, the soul of each individual person, is ultimately just identical with Brahman, right? There really is no difference, right? There's only unity at the end of the day, right? So how one answers these sorts of questions really is going to be directly related to various types of religious forms and religious worship. The relation between one and many is central in all metaphysics, including the religious. The explanatory role of forms. This is from Dr. Eric Pearl's book, Thinking Being. Dr. Pearl is a professor at Loyola Marymount, was a professor at Loyola Marymount University, where I did my master's degree, who I learned Plato from. He says, quote, Plato's metaphysics, centered on the concept of form, can reasonably be said to begin with the problem of sameness and difference. How can many things, which, in that they are many, are different from each other, nonetheless be the same, and so truly bear the same name? How, for example, can many things be pious or impious? The question of the Euthyphro. Many things be beautiful? The question of the greater Hippias. Many different states of character be virtues? Meno. In that, while being different, they are also in some respect the same. There must be something the same about them. Or as Socrates says in the Meno, they must all, quote, have some one same form, end quote. The word translated here, this is still from Dr. Pearl, traditionally but inadequately as form, is eidos, or in other similar passages, the related word idea. As has often been pointed out, these words are related to words for seeing and less directly knowing in Greek and other Indo-European languages. Their fundamental meaning is the look or appearance of something, the way they show up to the gaze. Many different things have some one same form, in that they all display the same content to the gaze, and so are truly identical as all pious, all beautiful, or all virtues. If there were no such looks in things, all identification of things in terms of what they are would have no basis in reality. If certain things are just, or wise, or good, or beautiful, there must be in each case a common look that all such things have or display. So Plato's notion of forms is simply an attempt to account for the sameness across difference. Many things are said to be just. There can be a just person, a just state, a just law, and a just decision. But those things are quite different from each other. A person is not the same as a state is not the same as a law is not the same as a decision. Yet all of them can be said to be just or unjust to varying degrees. Various things can be said to be red, or hot, or cold, or blue, or tall, or short, or etc., etc. Thus, there is a sort of conceptual look to all of those notions, a conceptual content that is said to be present in the various instances that have that look, that are instances of virtue, or redness, or justice, etc. So, what are forms? Well, a form, eidos, is a real idea. That's the simplest way I can think to put it. Plato's doctrine of forms is that there are real ideas, that ideas are real, right? That ideas are not merely subjective phenomena. That's a very sort of early modern way of thinking after the Cartesian turn. The idea that there's a subject that thinks about things, that represents the objects in the world. The Greeks didn't think that way, and Plato doesn't think that way. Ideas are fundamental truths, fundamental realities. They are not only just as real as physical things, they are more real than physical things. Physical things come to be and pass away, but ideas don't come to be and pass away, right? Particular dogs grow old and die, but the notion of dog, the form of dog, the what it is to be a dog does not grow old and die. That remains unchanged by the coming into being or passing away of any particular dog, or indeed even the whole of dogs. Even if all dogs were to die, still the sort of form or aspect or what it is to be of dogness would remain. It would be a kind of idea, a type of abstract form that retained its reality independent of any of the particulars that fall under it. So forms are the true essences, the unchanging natures, the intellectual looks of things. Plato posits a conceptual division between sensible things, appearances, and forms, real realities. So he's not saying that the sensible world is completely false or fake, rather that the sensible world is a sort of kaleidoscopic presentation of the many particular things, many shattered little instances of like so many shattered bits of light broken off from the one beam of white light, these fractured little colors, these fractured instances that exemplify the forms, but not fully, that they only give partial witness to them. So forms are not primarily mental images, right, or subjective notions in this modern sense of the word idea. Forms are reality at its most basic and essential. Forms are really real reality. So let's take an example, the example of the beautiful. Many things are beautiful. For example, the ocean is beautiful, or can be. Audrey Hepburn is beautiful. The Sistine Chapel is beautiful. And the moon is beautiful. 4 beautiful things. But clearly they're all very different types of things. The ocean is not much like Audrey Hepburn, who in turn is not much like the Sistine Chapel, which is utterly unlike the moon. None of the many beautiful things is the beautiful itself, right? It's not the case that any one of these particular beautiful things is identical to beauty as such. So if I'm showing you these particular things, if you were to ask me what is beauty, and I said, well, the ocean is beautiful. You said, okay, well, what else? I said, well, Audrey Hepburn is beautiful. I said, keep going. I said, well, the Sistine Chapel is beautiful. The moon is also beautiful. What if you then said, well, what is real beauty itself, though? Not these particular things, but what is the real stuff? It's not like I'm going to lead you into a back room and say, like, oh, I see you're a real connoisseur. I got the real stuff here for you. And then I slosh out, real beauty from a bucket onto the floor. I say, here it is, the real stuff. Like, there's no physical substance that is the beautiful. It's not that kind of thing. It's not material in nature. Because the material elements would seem to be different in each case. The ocean is materially very different from a person, which is materially different from people represented in oil paint, which is materially different from the lunar body that orbits this planet. None of these beautiful things exhaust the beautiful as such. They're all exemplifications or particular instances of the beautiful. So what is the beautiful? Well, it's no particular thing. It's a form. It's a concept. Defining it is very difficult. It seems to have a lot to do with harmony, balance, right? And that's assuming that we grant it some sort of objective validity and don't take the sophistical route of saying that beauty is merely in the eye of the beholder, which is to say there's no such thing as beauty. There's just various things that give rise to subjective responses that are more or less pleasant to this or that person. If we are to treat beauty as something in itself, right, then it must have some sort of quality, that it's balanced, harmonious, that it is capable of giving rise to a certain type of satisfaction in certain types of creatures, perhaps, right, and so on and so forth. But the point is, whatever it is, it's not a particular physical thing. It's a form. It's a real idea. So form is definition. Whatever the beautiful itself is, clearly it is not one particular beautiful thing. The beautiful itself is not a thing, but a form, a real idea that shows up in many particular things, or as Plato will sometimes say, that the many beautiful things participate in. The same holds true for any trait, feature, or property that holds of or for many particular things. Euthyphro, right? Consider Euthyphro when Socrates asks him what is the pious and what the impious. Euthyphro says, I say that what I'm doing now is pious, to prosecute the wrongdoer. Thus he reaches for what he's doing in the moment as one particular instance, not understanding that Socrates is not asking for an example, but the underlying definition. Socrates responds, perhaps you agree, however, that there are many other pious actions. Euthyphro, there are. Socrates, bear in mind then that I did not bid you tell me one or two of the many pious actions, but that form itself that makes all pious actions pious. Tell me what this form itself is, so that I may look upon it, and using it as a model, say that any action of yours or another's that is of that kind is pious, and if it is not, that it is not. That's what we're looking for here. Form as definition, as a sort of guide for picking out the right types of particulars in acts of judgment and saying, here, this is an instance of a pious action. I know because it exhibits these qualities, and these qualities conform to my understanding of what piety is as this definition, right, this form. So these are supposed to be guiding principles, in a sense, that help orient us in action, not just abstract philosophical curiosities, but definitions that hold practical and normative weight. So the goal of refuting the Sophists, let's consider that one a little bit more. An objection may be raised here. There is no such thing as the beautiful or the pious or the just. There are only various beliefs about such things. This is what we can anticipate someone like Protagoras saying. Of course, Plato's dialogues are full of discussions between Socrates and various sophists on just these sorts of issues. So the sophists would continue, such beliefs differ from time to time, place to place, and individual to individual. There's no such thing as the objectively beautiful itself or the objectively just itself. There's merely different opinions on the same. For example, the idea I just mentioned a moment ago, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is to say that nothing is beautiful or ugly, but thinking makes it so. So a modern version of this would be people saying, speak your truth, this sort of thing, as if truth were particularized from person to person. So this is, of course, the position of the ancient sophists, people like Protagoras, Gorgias, Callicles, and Thrasymachus. The sophists were professional teachers, and the sophists were broadly agreed that truth is relative, whatever that is supposed to mean. Protagoras' famous maxim being that man is the measure of all things, which would seem to indicate that there is no objective truth in things. There are only man-made interpretations, only opinions. Now, there are clearly some logical problems with this doctrine. Saying there is no truth immediately runs afoul of itself being a truth claim. And so we have to wonder, well, is that true? And of course, that's a source of embarrassment when they have to say if it's true, then it's false that there is no truth, because now there's at least one true claim. And of course, if it's false, which it clearly must be, then we can get back to looking for truth. Or saying everything is opinion, is that itself a mere opinion claim? It must be if everything is mere opinion. But if somehow that's exempt from the status of being merely an opinion, then it runs afoul of its own principle and is self-contradicting. So when we assess the opinion of the sophists, right, it would seem that they preach various forms of relativism, whether it's epistemic relativism, that all truth is relative, or merely normative relativism, that value is relative. It might differ from sophist to sophist, but they preach some form of a relativistic creed. So assess the following statements. All truth is relative. There is no truth. Everything is simply a matter of opinion. As I just mentioned, such claims are incoherent because they're all self-contradictory. Each one of them wants to be taken seriously as a truth claim, but the minute it is taken seriously as a truth claim, it undermines itself or undercuts itself because it's self-vitiating. Right, so what would follow from the adoption of such views? In addition to their logical problems, what would follow would be the impossibility of true knowledge, that there is no true knowledge, there's merely opinion, the denial of any fundamental structure or nature to reality, and moral nihilism. This is what doesn't just maybe follow, it's what inevitably follows. It's what was designed to follow from these views. And the problems with all three of those things, I think, should be fairly self-evident. Obviously, most people, I believe, want to at least think that some type of true knowledge is possible. Most people are at least broadly convinced of the explanatory powers of at least some of the sciences and the technological abilities that the sciences can boast of. If the world is completely nihilistic, as the sophists say, it's hard to make sense of anything like objective scientific fact. And as well, the moral problems should be fairly obvious. Moral nihilism is deeply problematic. Whatever morality amounts to, that we have some sort of moral obligation in this world would be something that everyone of any sort of religious or metaphysical stripe would seem to be in agreement with, except, of course, the sophist. The one and the many again. Presocratic thinkers such as Thales and Parmenides assert the one. Everything is water, or everything is the what is. In doing so, they would seem to deny the many, or at least make it very problematic. The sophists assert the many opinions, many beliefs. In doing so, they deny the one. So, once again, we're back to how can we affirm the one while preserving the many? Because either we get the sort of explanatory tyranny of these early pre-Socratic metaphysicians and ontologists, or we get the sort of moral nihilism and scattered thinking of the sophists. So Plato is trying to do a lot of delicate things here, bring together a lot of different goals and threads in a delicate metaphysical tapestry designed to address a lot of threats and answer a lot of explanatory goals all at once. On being and seeming. Note the following two fundamental truths. First, explanation and understanding seek and demand unity. Second, the world of the senses is constantly changing. I take it that these are both self-evidently true. I've already discussed at length why explanation would seem to demand or posit a type of unity. Language works through unifying, through the positing of words that stand in as unifying symbols for a variety of discrete particular things. So I take it that that's a type of self-evident statement that explanation and understanding seek and demand unity. And second, the world of the senses is constantly changing. That's self-evident to anyone who has senses. In our attempts to understand, then, we attempt to grasp the nature of being itself as it truly is. That's what understanding is, according to the first sort of broad rule. Let us call this being, broadly, right? The nature of being itself as it truly is, we'll simply call being. But in our sensible experiences of the world, we witness an endless cycle of change, of things coming to be and passing away. Let us call this seeming, or becoming, or changing. So the world of broad explanatory truth, logical unity, the world of Thalesian prime substance and Parmenidean what-isness, we'll call that being, and the changing of the sensible world we'll call seeming, becoming, or changing. Now, if all that existed was the world of seeming, becoming, or changing, then knowledge would be impossible. If everything was constantly changing, there could be no knowledge, because knowledge is a type of unity across change that picks out particular things and affixes meaning to them. But if everything was changing, including the terms of discourse, the nature of meaning, and words themselves, then no knowledge could ever be possible by definition. So it would seem as though we need a type of explanatory unity provided by something outside of the shifting and changing particulars of the world that allow us to pick out and articulate certain types of things as having meaning and structure, and thus to engage in any type of meaningful cognitive act in the first place. So I want to address for a moment what I'm going to call the two-world metaphor. So far it should be, I think, hopefully becoming clear what Plato's up to with his doctrine of forms. He's attempting to provide a stable basis for explanation behind the shifting, changing particulars through positing underlying changeless essences, true natures, true realities, true eidos, or true eidoi, I guess the plural of eidos, I think it would be eidoi. I'm not totally certain about that, but anyway, multiple, forms. That this is what provides the sort of intellectual, intelligible superstructure behind the shifting particular things that we see with our senses that allows us to pick out, identify things, collate them, and create a system of meaning and truth. Now, what Plato's not doing, I think, is creating a type of philosophical or substance dualism. He's often charged with a type of dualism. It's often said that Plato splits reality into two distinct realms or worlds. A lot of common presentations of Plato online are guilty of presenting him this way, where the world of being or the realm of the forms is seen as a separate, sort of almost physical place apart from the world becoming, the realm of sensible experience, becoming, and change. When Plato talks like this, I think it's best to take it metaphorically. He will sometimes say things, especially in dialogues like the Phaedo, that make it sound like this is his view, a type of almost substance dualism that posits a distinct realm of eternal verities apart from this realm of changeable things. But there's truly only one reality, namely reality, right? We're in it, we're part of it, it's real. Reality is fundamentally constituted by forms. That's Plato's thesis, eternal, unchanging, real ideas. Forms show up in various particular things, right? We have access to the forms initially through the sensible organs. We see certain things and we derive certain types of semantic meaning or intellectual content from them, form ideas on the basis of those sensible impressions, and thus, create things like language, systems of meaning. But first we have access to them through the senses. The world of the senses is not an illusion, it's just a partial presentation of the underlying reality, which is the changeless world of eternal truths. Where again, it's not a distinct world, it's just the fullest possible realization of this world that we exist within. So learning and understanding, growing in the world, is the grasping of forms, the coming to understand of forms. Finding a deficit in our understanding, learning that we don't understand something, sends us looking for understanding. So Socrates is always invoking aporia in his listeners, always getting them to see that they don't understand, introducing into them a type of intellectual anxiety over their lack of understanding that results in things like Meno insulting Socrates or Euthyphro just cutting the conversation short. But for those who are better natured, like Phaedrus, it causes them to actually reflect upon their lack of understanding and strive to do better, to grow as a result of the promptings that Socrates offers them. So learning and understanding is the grasping of forms behind the shifting sensible particulars. So in Republic Book 6, we get this very famous simile of the sun. In Book 6 of the Republic, Plato is talking about the form of the good. And Glaucon asks Socrates to describe and discuss the good in the same way as he's discussed justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation, the other cardinal virtues for a city to have. And Socrates says that he's not up to the task. He can't describe the good itself. The good is beyond being. The good is the sort of form of forms. Because if you think about it, all these other particular virtues, justice, moderation, courage, and wisdom, all of them are good, right? So goodness, whatever it is a type of form that would have a sort of privileged existence, because all things that are said to be good, which in essence is anything that has any being, right, can be said to be good or bad or of a certain sort relative to the type of thing that it is and its potential. Goodness would be a privileged sort of overarching form. And indeed, Socrates says he can't discuss it directly. Instead, he can say what it's like. And he says that the good in the sensible world is like the sun. The sun, he says, is the offspring of the good, which the good begat in its likeness or image, is the analog of the good. He says the sun provides light, and light provides the linkage between the eye and visible objects. The eye can work just fine, and there can be visible objects to be seen, but in the absence of light, provided most fully, of course, by the sun, there is no vision that happens. So the sun is that which provides the conditions for the possibility of sight occurring. So too, the form of the good, the ultimate form that underlies all reality, the Platonic sense of God, the form of the good is the linkage that allows the mind to grasp the forms. What the sun is in the sensible realm in relation in its relating link between the eye and the visible objects, the form of the good is in the mental realm between the mind and the intelligible truths of the world, the forms. Meaning that education, coming to understand the world, has a normative or moral aspect, or is perhaps fundamentally normative or moral. This is why Meno is not able to come to any understanding with Socrates, because he has a bad will and a bad disposition, whereas the slave boy, low-born as he is open to learning, and is thus able to actually make progress in the geometrical lesson that Socrates offers him, whereas Meno remains as steadfastly ignorant about the nature of virtue by the end of his discussion with Socrates as he was at its beginning, because he's not motivated by any sort of good moral principle. He desires to make fine-sounding speeches and play the role of the wise man rather than actually putting in the work to become one. So coming to understand the world is only possible in a morally attuned individual, that knowledge itself is already a morally charged undertaking. The next famous image that Plato or Socrates gives to Glaucon and Adeimantus at the end of Book 6 of Republic is the divided line, where he says that we can understand things in terms of the reality exists as a type of line or continuum, where first we have the images of things that are grasped by the imagination, the images, shadows, reflections, works of imagination, fiction, and representation that are sort of like sideways glimpses or reflections of physical particulars, which are themselves like projections, shadows, or images of mathematical objects, more broad truths, numbers, shapes, and concepts, which are themselves reflections or abstractions of the fundamental truth of reality, which is the good. So the line here, it is a divided line, but it's also a continuous line. Reality exists on a continuum for Plato. The physical world is not false, it's just the least robust presentation of what's most fully disclosed to the mind in dialectic philosophy when it grasps the form of the good, when it grasps the abstract objects of metaphysical speculation. The allegory of the cave comes right after these two images. Of course, the allegory of the cave, being the most famous of all Platonic images, presents the effect of education on the soul, or the lack of education on the soul, And in it, Socrates gives a very vivid, evocative, and memorable depiction of the natural human condition of being akin to a prisoner locked into a cave from birth who can only see the shifting shadows projected by a fire manipulated by these mysterious puppeteers. We'll take up this allegory in the next lecture.